Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for AI in Management, our session 4. So we're right almost at the top of the hour, so we can go ahead and start diving in as people pop in. So we've been talking about what's really happening in the AI space as we take a look at AI, as we take a look at our role within it, and how we serve our team's best and our organization's best so that we don't get lost in transition, right? So, a very key aspect of big shifts in technology and robotics has been how we, as leaders and managers, have actually created a space for everyone in that transition. So, in case you haven't met me before, I'm Dr. Myra Austin. I'm the CEO and founder of Management Cues, which I will share a little bit about in a second. But I'm also a professor at Westcliff University and at the Institute of Southern California, Institute of Technology and Engineering. And so I have quite a bit of work going on in the technical space, and I'm taking a look at what people are experiencing within that. So, Management Cues. So, my company, Management Cues, is focused on creating a special experience around training, one that really focuses in on what managers are living through, how they're learning, and whether they're actually taking what they learn and putting it into action. So, we have a unique way of training, very immersive, highly experiential, and we continue to explore that avenue. So for today, we're going to break things down the way we've been breaking them down. We'll start with an overview, a breakdown, some takeaways, and some resources that you can use right away, and then we'll close it out. So today's topic is really interesting because we're focusing on what's happening to culture, what's happening to the employee's perception as we're experiencing this shift in technology. So one thing that's really interesting is that right now, whether we acknowledge it or not, whether we've spent time on it or not, the shift is happening, right? Whether we're dialed in or not. So we're currently experiencing a navigating between performance, experience, and these data tracked environments. And within that, we're seeing the rise of AI split into two sides of a coin, right? Where we have consequential experiences of what we know or don't know, and things that are happening by design, things like automation and efficiency and saving time and saving costs, right? Those are kind of by design why we're using them. And then lastly, there's an impact that's taking place. And this impact is taking place in such a way that it's affecting things operationally, physically, psychologically, and neurologically because of the nature of AI. Right. So here are some of the current things that are in practice already, and you might already be using them in your environment, and hence the need for that awareness around what's happening. So some of the current AI employee monitoring tools in the US that are being used are softwares like Hubstaff or Time Doctor or ActiveTrack or Insightful. So if you haven't heard of those, take a look at them, explore them, and maybe confirm if you're using them in your environment. But here's what those do. They track time, apps, websites, and idle activity. They capture screenshots and generate productivity scores. They provide dashboards for managers, right? So these things are already kind of in our environments. And there's a significance around awareness around what they do, what they don't do, and the impact that they're having, right? The premise of today's topic. So Gartner 2020 actually reported that there was a big and significant increase in employee monitoring specifically during remote work expansion. So this was around the COVID time. So COVID did something for us. It shifted us into gear. And honestly, I think there were several companies across all of the US and internationally even that shifted from on-site work to hybrid or remote work, which changed the way we look at performance, participation, engagement, right? But it also opened the door for more. And so I think it's important to acknowledge what a historical shift it was for how we work. So there are also basic office software that now have AI integrations within them. These are commonly used in any business. Microsoft 365 now has that Copilot integration. Anything that's Google based or in the Google workspace has Gemini. And QuickBooks also has an AI integration embedded within it as well. So the monitoring, the tracking, the automation, it's all pretty much everywhere. So AI driven behavioral analytics and risk detection. So these are some softwares that are being used right now actively in the workforce, at least in the US. Terramind, Variado, and Interguard, right? And these are sometimes running on the back end, but as managers and leaders, it's important for us to know how and when these things are being used, right? Because we have a responsibility to not only be informed, but to lead our teams through the exposure and the impact of these types of tools. So here's what those tools do. They use AI to detect anomalies, insider threats, and risky behavior, and to analyze patterns, not just activity. So, what's interesting about this particular contribution is that when you're looking at analyzing patterns, you're almost looking at predicting behavior. And that changes the way we manage, the way that we make decisions, how we manage our interactions with people, how we look at overall outcomes, what assumptions we make, right? What bias is embedded. And so that's why this is particularly interesting. But they also trigger alerts based on the intent-based scoring. So that we're scoring what we think the intention is behind the patterns we see, right? So interesting place to be in. Monitoring is moving from what you did to what your behavior actually means. And so again, there's this other layer of interpretation. Stealth surveillance, heavy tools, also known as bossware, that are currently being used in environments include Sentry PC, Work Examiner, and iMonitorSoft. And these also kind of are embedded and working on the back end in most environments. And so as leaders, as managers, again, awareness is key. And maybe it starts with just asking, are we using any of these in our environment? Should we be aware that they're being used, right? And the capabilities around that particular technology is keystroke logging, screen recording, email and chat monitoring, and clipboard tracking, right? So all of this is invasive. It's taking track of everything and every little detail that employees are navigating through in their daily work. These are tools that are often associated with low trust environments and compliance heavy industries. So it's important because this does have an impact on the psyche of people who are being exposed to them, who are managers and leaders within that environment, or even those who may not even be aware that they're there, right? Because then you have an absence of consent. So the management call out here is this shift isn't about new tools. It's about redefining managerial work. So managers are moving from information processors, which is really what we did before, right? We processed information as we kind of observed it, as we collected it, as we physically moved through it, to decision orchestrators. And we have to be more strategic about the decisions we make, careful and conscientious, and stop, be able to pause, right? So there are cognitive load shifts from recall to judgment that are taking place, because now we have to really not only look at the data that's being provided to us through these types of tools that are integrated through our everyday environments, but we have to think about, is this right? Right? Who is impacted by it? Is this fair? Is this creating burnout or additional stress? Is this affecting the well-being of the person that it's about? Right? So the decisions are definitely shifting for managers and leaders. The employee experience is something that is now of central focus because we are incorporating higher degrees of monitoring, and we're tracking performance to a different degree, and it creates something within the employee. So the employee perception gap is one thing that managers and leaders are up against. And so 56% of monitored employees report higher levels of stress, right? And so they're being observed throughout the entire work experience. 66% of job seekers avoid companies with heavy AI monitoring, right? Because there's so much to consider around this technology. The tools are not the issue. However, it's the interpretation, right? It's not the tool, it's how we're using the tool, how well we know the tool, how we know the good and the bad around the tool, right? So, right now, organizations are in this phase because it's still fairly new. So, it's being adopted. We're excited about what it does, we're excited about the potential efficiency and how it can make our lives better. And and we are over relying on quantitative signals, right? So we're relying on activity, time, and clicks, and we're under investing in areas of context, judgment, and human-centered leadership, and helping leaders and managers navigate through what the shift looks like, where their focus should be, what is the consequence of using these tools, what is a clear return on investment, right? Like there's all of this other stuff associated with using these tools in a way that really serves our organization and our teams. So employee well-being and emotions, and the psychological impact, of course, are things that are relevant with the use of AI. AI adoption can trigger negative emotional responses, so we have to teach people to cope with that, to understand that, right? To within the dynamic of the workplace, and stress and anxiety are a companion, and they're associated with heavy use of this technology. These emotions directly reduce innovation and performance. So while we're automating and we might be reducing certain physical labor or roles or all of that, while we still need humanity in place, we still need them to innovate and perform. And so for that reason, we need to understand these connectors between technology like AI, the stress it creates, and the anxiety, among other areas. So, job insecurity, anxiety, and identity threat. So, identity threat is something that is coming to the surface because we're now seeing, companies like Amazon and UPS have these massive layoffs, right? And so that has a domino effect across different industries. So, AI increases job insecurity, workplace anxiety, and turnover intention. It leads to these experiences that people are having, which includes knowledge hiding behaviors, lower job satisfaction, and burnout, right? Because you're in essence almost competing with these realities that are happening in the environment. So employees experience identity threat, which is the fear of being replaced or devalued. And so this is a very real thing. And so leaders who are prepared, managers who are prepared, are speaking to this and providing guidance around this, right? But managers who aren't aware, or leaders who don't incorporate this as part of their implementation or as part of their plan or strategy, then they have this pocket that bubbles up later when it comes to employees. So AI impact on morale. So morale isn't just a feeling, it's more than that, right? There's quite a bit of neuroscience behind it. So increased stress and cognitive load. So constant performance visibility, real-time feedback loops. Employees are feeling like they are constantly being evaluated, and that creates a degree of pressure, not only that we have not been used to, but it isn't always necessarily healthy or impactful, right? So we have to be able to distinguish between what our objective is and what's actually happening. So neuroscience insight here is that perceived constant evaluation actually activates the threat response, right? And this has more to do with how human beings are wired in any environment. If we're under constant scrutiny, if we're under constant pressure, we naturally go into a threat response, which naturally has us reduce focus, creativity, and the quality of our decision because for lack of a better phrase, we're kind of in this panic mode, right? Whether we acknowledge it or not. There's also a loss of autonomy. So, algorithmic systems dictate things like task prioritization, workflow pacing, and performance expectations. So, it feels like it's a little bit out of our control. There's no room for exceptions, for contexts, for lived scenarios. So, employees feel controlled when that happens rather than empowered. So, you shift from ownership to compliance, right? And so, it feels like this rigor heavy type of relationship. Job insecurity and identity threat, like we mentioned, is the fear of job displacement and that your skills are becoming obsolete, which again is it's a real thing, right? That people are experiencing and feeling. And it creates psychological tension, am I being augmented or am I being replaced? And so when we're not creating boundaries around that and paths and, transparency, that's the feeling that is left behind. So anxiety, disengagement, and reduced commitment is what ends up happening. And again, we might be replacing some roles, we might be cutting some labor short, but that doesn't mean we're completely getting rid of everybody. And so we have to be mindful of what it is that we want to accomplish, because there's also an erosion of trust. So especially when AI is used for monitoring, performance scoring, decision making without any explanation, we're not anchoring what we're trying to achieve, and so it becomes difficult. A lack of transparency is perceived as unfairness in work environments, right? So as managers, we have to know that that's the equation that we create when in my opinion, when we don't fully know what tools we're using on the front end and the back end, when we don't know what protocol we should build around it, when we don't know how to explain the impact and haven't gone through that kind of ideation or design process or strategic planning around it, we fall short. And so people default to their assumptions, to what they're feeling, and ultimately land in this place of it just feels unfair. So here's an interesting case study, a legal case study with Amazon. And Amazon, has been using AI for a minute, but this has to do with algorithmic management and worker surveillance. So they were surveilling their workers, and they have been using AI-driven systems for a little bit. So here's what happened with Cameron versus Amazon. So the Amazon warehouse systems they were using, they used AI and automation, and it was tracking productivity in real time. It was triggering disciplinary action. So literally the system was pointing to disciplinary action anytime something happened, right? So they were monitoring worker behavior continuously, right? And I actually have hired a few Amazon managers and leaders in the past and have spoken to them about this. So it was pretty intense. But definitely didn't feel like the human was being acknowledged in the process, right? So violations ended up happening of the National Labor Relations Act. And where they landed, because again, AI is new and this type of surveillance is newer, legislation is catching up to it. Surveillance was interfering with organizing rights. So because they were monitoring and surveilling people for a very strict periods and long periods, anytime the worker would step away or anytime the worker would act outside of that, even if it was within their rights, the technology would flag it and there would be disciplinary consequences, which of course legally is a violation. So those are considered coercive working conditions, which goes back to my points, right? Not acknowledging the human within the process, not being clear on how something is being used and whether that's in line with the environments that you're in. That's a matter of training and educating managers, right? Because when we're not educated, we don't know how to identify the exception. And the algorithmic monitoring may violate labor law if it chills protected activity in this example, right? So here's the algorithmic discipline. Automated systems flagged workers for productivity below threshold and attendance or idle time metrics. So part of the problem is that it didn't make an exception. It didn't pivot, right? It didn't have a lived lens. It didn't incorporate maybe legal boundaries when they happened, right? And so that's the challenge with these environments and the directions we're moving in if we're not pausing to learn about the human in the middle, right? So the legal concern with this example was whether AI driven discipline constitutes unfair labor practices, improper surveillance of that protected activity. Because there's a couple of things. One, it's stepping away from the workflow that they were in. And the second part is that's their right to gather around any concerns that they have as employees, right? And that doesn't need to be surveilled, right? So it's all of these things that are really interesting, but you're seeing more of this because we now have AI integrated in almost everything. So the NLRB is now increasingly scrutinizing these areas, specifically when it comes to digital surveillance and productivity scoring systems. So for managers, I think even if you're not using digital surveillance in your environment, take a look at how you look at productivity and if there's any AI use embedded in it. I think that that's a good way to start and get curious. So why is this important? Everything I've shared so far, right? A mix of the human component, a mix of how tools are being used and how AI is kind of integrated in everyday work life. It's important because leadership and management awareness needs to be the same pace of how this is happening, and it's not at this time. So the rise of performative productivity. So employees optimize for metrics and visibility, right? So they're focused on that because they're being measured on that, and that could be a problem. They're not necessarily focusing on value and outcomes. They're just focusing on checking those boxes, and that's not necessarily a really impactful and productive way to work. So short-term productivity increases when this happens, and meaningful engagement decreases. And so we have to be aware that that's what we're doing when we're using these tools, and how to mitigate it, how to create pauses, how to train people, how to talk to people, how to gauge whether we're actually getting the return on investment from the technology. Communication and transparency strategies. So I'm going to give you a couple of strategies, and I think it's actually three, so maybe a few, that you can use if you're integrating AI into your environment as a manager, or if you're just even talking about it, right? Even if you're starting to understand how AI is going to be used in your environment, or maybe even just ask questions. So explain the why before the what. So it's really important to frame this correctly for people. Don't start with the features or policies. And most people, that's exactly what they start with. But don't start with that. Start with why you're using it, why it's a benefit, how it's going to help them, and what the end objective is of the use. You want to clearly articulate why the tool or change is being implemented. And if there's no specific reason why you're doing it, just because you're on the bandwagon, that's a red flag, right? What problem does it actually solve? And how it supports the team, not just the organization, your team. How does this support your team, right? And it's important to make those connections. When you do this, the impact is that it reduces resistance and it reframes AI as a support tool, not a surveillance tool. Define boundaries explicitly. So ambiguity is what makes it difficult to trust, and starts to create these assumptions and these feelings of insecurity for employees. So you want to remember that ambiguity erodes trust faster than monitoring itself, right? It's how it starts that typically creates the problem in implementation. So you want to be clear about what is being tracked, what is not being tracked, and literally explicit. So literally spell it out. When does the monitoring apply and when it does not? It's important to make those distinctions because the technology is so powerful. The impact when you do this is that it prevents assumption-driven anxiety and rumor cycles, which is what will happen because that is how people work. And as long as people are involved, you're going to have this kind of negative fallout. Translate data into human context. So do not rely on dashboards to speak for themselves, right? Don't put so much weight on the dashboards and make it like as if there's no mistakes there, right? Or there could be no error. You want to explain what the data means. what it does not mean, and how it will and won't be used to make decisions specifically. And that's important because that's how employees will prioritize where they spend their resources. It's how people compartmentalize, and it's also just part of self-preservation, and that's a very natural thing. So the impact when you do this is that you reduce that automation bias and misinterpretation, right? So the automation bias, as a reminder, is when you default to thinking that anything that comes from the technology is better or more correct, or you should have that be the decision, right? Create two-way communication loops. So transparency is not a one-time announcement. It's an ongoing dialogue around this shift, right? So that's another mistake I've seen done already is you announce one time what you're doing, how it works, and you move on, and you think that that is all that is required. But you want to build in regular check-ins when you do shifts like these, and when you're integrating technology that's this powerful. Open Q&A forums, anonymous feedback channels. Again, you want to create a feeling of safety, right? Not threat. And you want to ask directly, how is this tool impacting your work experience? And literally get the details around what people are experiencing and feeling throughout the process. The impact there is that if you do it this way, it increases psychological safety and surfaces issues early. And you want to catch those issues before they derail your entire project, right? Or implementation, or create a legal risk. So acknowledge impact, not just implementation. Most managers explain the rollout, but ignore that human experience. So recognize change fatigue, concerns about fairness or job security, and learning curves. So you want to be able to normalize adjustment periods and imperfection during adoption, right? Make it holistic. And the impact there is that this signals to the team that there's empathy, and that strengthens trust. And there's a lot that's affecting people around these shifts in technology. So we show empathy as part of our leadership, right? So our key takeaways for today are these. AI amplifies culture, it doesn't replace it. So if you have a poor, disconnected culture, AI will amplify it and create higher risk, not minimize it. Visibility without context erodes trust. We have to be very clear as managers and leaders as to what the technology does, why we're using it, and what's good and bad about it. Because when it comes to technology this powerful, there's a good side and there's a bad side. Perception drives reality. So how people are feeling will absolutely impact the business and will absolutely make your job harder if you're not managing it. Transparency is a continuous practice. It's not a one-time publication. It's a way of managing, and it's the way of managing in the future. Managers are the trust multiplier. So we're in a unique position right now with these shifts taking place and people feeling the way that they are. Leaders and strategic executives are looking at how to improve their business models and save time and money and be optimal in terms of performance. Managers are really in the weeds and seeing what people are living through. So it is a responsibility and a privilege to be in that space. So just make sure that you understand that. Okay, so I'll leave a few seconds for Q&A. I don't see any questions on YouTube, so I'll go ahead and keep going as we close out for today. So training and support resources, you'll get a copy of this recording and a copy of the webinar deck. You'll also get a tool along with this series. And we have training programs that are available and custom for the different pain points you're experiencing across some of the areas that we talk about. We have, of course, our management planner, which our version 3 is going to be out in May. So very excited about that. And if you're curious about the research studies that we've done around neuroscience and our programs and why we get the results we get, you can access those through this link. And of course, if you want to speak with me anytime, you're welcome to schedule a free consultation. And last but not least, we also have membership programs which support managers month to month with a series of upcoming trends and the latest on management. So with that said, thank you so much for joining. Next session is our last session, and we're going to be covering building AI-ready leadership capacity. And that's really stepping into the mentality around leadership and how to be ready for all of this, and how to continue to stay in tune with the shifts that come with it. So thank you so much for joining us. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll catch you on the next